I just wanted to congratulate you on being one of the top 5 coaches nominated by Porter Magazine. And John Whittington was another one that was nominated by Porter Magazine. And this is an international magazine, so to me that means that you and John Whittington are 2 of the top 5 coaches in the world. What is exciting for me is that both of you have a background in family constellations, system dynamics, organizational constellations, and that's absolutely wonderful. Tell me, what's the difference between what someone who may be considered a traditional coach, what they might do differently or the same as someone who's got a system dynamics background like you and John? Maybe, in fact, what do you and John do that is different from someone with the traditional approach?
So your traditional coach, as most of us know, is what you would call a life coach. They work with a person, with a client, address the issues, work towards goals. And what's different perhaps about a system dynamics coach or an organizational dynamics coach is that we work with the family and the organizational system. So we're working with the broader system. Who is this person in the system? How is the issue based in this system? Where does it connect? Is it strictly in the organization, or is it in fact something that originates in the family system? And what we find is that with more information on both systems, this really opens it up for the client to be able to explore in more depth and to be able to take often what looks like a really bad situation, or what we may call a train smash, and find the gold beneath it. So it becomes a strength rather than something that drags them down. Why is that important? For many of the clients, it means that we're looking broadly. There's a lot of hope and a lot of positivity, but there's also a very hard look at what is. Because the truth of the matter is, and this is a systemic approach, until you can acknowledge exactly what is without wishing for it to change, there's not a place for you to move. You're moving from a false base. So it's a very evenly balanced approach. Perhaps the other piece that people like is that there's no judgment. We simply look at each person or each element in its position and see what value it has or what it does in that position. So people, I would say, report feeling not judged, but certainly able to look at issues in ways that they haven't before and walk away stronger.
So one of the ideas behind coaching is that the coach will help me develop my goal, help me decide what it is in the direction that I want to go. So assuming that I want to be the next chief executive officer of the company that I work for, and my understanding is you work with people that are high-level executives, so that's not really out of your norm, right?
True.
So I would want to become the next chief executive officer. And I notice that I tend to go so far and then something stops. I blank, or I'm just stuck there. What might I be looking from both the workplace and the family?
Okay, so from an organizational point of view, you may find that in that role, for example, a COO or someone a little bit lower down but wanting to move up, you may find that either the CEO position is a difficult position and people subconsciously know it, or you may find that there is something behind the jump from one to the other. There is a dynamic that's tied into that. So you'd want to examine that and have a look to see what stops you, what in fact is the dynamic or the hidden piece that's stopping you, so that you can step into that. I've worked with people who say, well, the 4 before me lasted 6 months each. I don't know why I'm nervous. Well, we kind of know why you're nervous. You're picking up the pattern of the 6 months. So that would certainly be one. But the other piece is this a work piece? Or is there something in my family that says you go so far and no further, or don't rise above your raising is one that I know we hear in the South, or don't get too big for your boots. So you really want to check, are any of those dynamics operating subconsciously for your client? And by having a look at the family patterns or the organizational patterns, you can pretty quickly identify what patterns are there and how they might limit the client and what you need to do to overcome that obstacle or to disentangle yourself from an involvement with perhaps a prior generation.
So that is really talking about some invisible dynamics in the organization. And I know that that is a topic in one of your courses. It's a section,
Right.
something that you do. What other invisible dynamics might be at play in an organization that may impact my growth in that organization?
Well, you may have a situation again where a particular role is what you call a revolving door syndrome, or a burdened position. So, for example, you may have an event that happened around that position, perhaps the CEO, perhaps an HR, whatever it is, and the person is perceived to be unfairly dismissed, or there is an element that's really not good, or perhaps there's an accident. But whatever it is, it's not fully acknowledged and it's not spoken about, but it lives in the system. So anybody who goes into that role has much the same thing happen to them, because there is an unconscious loyalty to the original one who was ejected from that seat. And so what you'll often find is that you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4. It becomes that revolving door syndrome.
So you talk a fair bit about unconscious loyalties,
Mm-hmm.
and they're quite confusing. I understand that they're unconscious, so if they're unconscious, I'm not aware of them, or the organization's not aware of them. So how can something that people are not aware really impact them?
Okay, so easiest way to look at it is you understand that you inherit your physical DNA. You don't see it, except that your eyes are blue like your mom's, or in your case, brown like your mom's. But you sure know you've got it. Emotional genetics and organizational genetics are much the same. You're inheriting patterns, generational patterns. You don't have to know about them for them to be there. It's a little bit like electricity or magnetism. You can't see it, but you sure feel the effects. So systems are like that. Systems have rules. And when you begin to violate those rules, it shows up in dynamics that come down to successive generations. You'll also notice that there may be a pattern that's passed down through generations. It starts off as an event that's not resolved, that spins off into what we call actions and sentences, systemic actions and systemic sentences. In other words, sentences and languaging, or actions and limitations that pass down through the generations, either in an organization or in a family.
How do they go down in an organization? I understand generations in my family, mom, grandma, so on and so forth. What are generations in an organization?
Don't do that, or you're going to get chopped by the founder. So everybody goes, okay, we don't do that one because the founder's going to get us. Or one of the other ones is, if you move too fast, you can injure us all. And that would be an example of a company that suddenly expands too fast, doesn't think ahead, or doesn't predict a catastrophe, and a whole lot of people are injured in the process or laid off. So those kinds of sentences then begin to live in the system as though they were living things, or as though they were concrete declarations, and people find themselves responding to that.
One of the things that you do that I know, because I know I've seen you in action, is this piece around language. You have a real knack for identifying language of how people speak, and it gives you clues. I sometimes wonder if people, when they know that about you, just
zip it. Not to let people know that, but yes, language itself is a systemic creature. It lives and breathes in a system, and we are literally tattling on ourselves all day long in the ways that we will put ourselves down, in the ways that we speak about our limitations, in the ways that we bump up into the do's and don'ts. We're talking about that all day long. So language, absolutely, and then also what I call initial movement, first movement. Mm-hmm. What is the first movement? Because people give themselves away with the first movement, not the second movement, which is the more acceptable movement. But certainly for me, words tell me a lot, and people repeat them in different flavors and in metaphors. So I listen very carefully for those.
So I'm wondering about maybe doing another 10-minute segment about language and first movement.
Sure.
Sure? Okay. So next, we'll do that one.
Good.
Thanks, Judy.